The last resort. The Galactic Conservation Center hung like a crystalline snowflake in deep space, its transparent biodomes glinting under the light of 3 distant suns. Inside her quarters, Maya Chen stared at the holographic file floating before her, displaying statistics that would make even the most seasoned xenobiologist's blood run cold. Species, Nyxtherian shadow beast. Status, critical, last known specimen. Threat level, Omega, 9. Failed handling attempts, 47. Casualties, 13 robotic units, 4 alien handlers, non-fatal. Current condition, deteriorating. Maya ran her fingers through her short black hair, the motion causing her neural implant to shimmer with a faint blue glow. The creature they'd brought in 3 months ago was dying, not from any physical ailment, but from what the alien veterinarians called psychic deterioration. The Nyxtherian, a being of living shadow and crystalline bone, had refused all care since its rescue from illegal trophy hunters. Handler Chen, your presence is requested in Director ZYXVA's office, the facility's AI announced, its voice rippling through the quantum particles in the air. Maya stood, straightening her adaptive environment suit, standard issue for human staff working in a facility designed to accommodate hundreds of alien species. The suit's surface rippled, adjusting its composition to match the atmospheric conditions as she made her way through the station's winding corridors. Director ZYXVA's office was a sphere of living crystal, hovering in the center of the administrative wing. The Arcturian administrator's 6 eyes focused on Maya as she entered, their bioluminescent glow dimming slightly in what Maya had learned was a sign of concern. You've reviewed the file, ZYXVA stated, multiple voice boxes creating a harmonic resonance that humans found oddly soothing. Yes, Director. I understand why you called me. Then you understand the gravity of the situation. The Nyxtherian is the last of its kind, Handler Chen. Its species once kept balance in the dark matter seas of the Andromeda Galaxy. Without proper care, it will perish within 14 solar cycles. Maya nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. The previous handlers, they all approached it with protective gear and restraints, didn't they? ZYXVA's crystalline form shimmered with surprise. Of course. The creature's touch can shred both matter and consciousness. Standard protocols demand. That's the problem, Maya interrupted, earning a startled pulse of light from the director. The Nyxtherians were empaths. They lived in deep space, feeding off the emotional energy of passing ships. The protective gear doesn't just block physical contact, it blocks emotional resonance. You cannot seriously be suggesting. I want to go in without barriers. No protective field, no psi dampeners. Just my environment suit for basic life support. The crystal sphere housing ZYXVA's consciousness pulsed with rapid colors. Absolutely not. The liability alone. With respect, Director, you called me because I specialize in impossible cases. On Earth, I was the only handler who could work with quantum-shifted timber wolves. On Europa, I rehabilitated a colony of methane-breathing leviathans. I've never lost a specimen. This is different, Handler Chen. The Nyxtherian isn't just dangerous, it's traumatized. The trophy hunters who captured it killed its entire pod. It's been alone, in pain, and angry for longer than most humans live. Maya stepped closer to the director's crystalline form, her reflection fragmenting across its faceted surface. Then it knows exactly how I felt after the Mars colony collapse. Sometimes, Director, the only way to help someone who's lost everything is to show them you understand that kind of pain. Silence filled the office, broken only by the subtle hum of the station's quantum core. Finally, ZYXVA's form dimmed to a soft blue. You have 7 solar cycles to show progress. After that, we must consider ending its suffering humanely. The documentation waiver will be sent to your neural implant. And Handler Chen. Yes, Director. Your species' propensity for what you call crazy ideas is either your greatest strength or a sign of collective madness. I'm never quite sure which. Maya smiled as she left the office, her mind already formulating a plan. The Nixtharian's enclosure was in the station's core, surrounded by layers of dark matter shielding. As she made her way there, she passed other handlers, beings of gas and light, crystalline entities, and forms human language had no words to describe. Each gave her what passed for a respectful nod in their culture. The observation deck overlooking the enclosure was empty except for Dr. Tal, a quantum physicist whose body existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. The portion visible to human perception looked like a swirling constellation of green stars. "The readings are getting weaker," Tal said, their voice creating patterns in the air. "Its consciousness is fragmenting." Maya studied the enclosure below. The Nixtharian was barely visible, a mass of living shadow darker than the space around it, with crystalline spines that seemed to catch light that didn't exist. Occasionally, it would shift, and Maya would catch glimpses of eyes that looked like dying stars. "Open the airlock," she said, beginning to disengage her suit's protection protocols. "Handler Chen, the probability of survival isn't as important as trying." Maya finished disabling the last safety protocol, leaving only basic life support active. Sometimes you have to trust that understanding goes both ways. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of quantum-stabilized air. Maya took a deep breath and stepped inside. In the observation deck above, alarms began to sound as her suit registered the disabled protections. She ignored them, focusing instead on the darkness ahead. The Nixtharian shifted, its crystalline spines creating a sound like breaking stars. Maya felt its attention focus on her, a pressure not just on her body, but on her mind. Memories of loss and pain bubbled to the surface, the Mars colony collapse, watching helplessly as red dust claimed her family's biodome, the years of therapy learning to live with the trauma. She didn't fight the memories. Instead, she let them flow, projecting them outward like she'd learned in her empathy training. The darkness stirred, crystal spines chiming in a different tone. "I know," Maya said softly, taking another step forward. "I know what it's like to be the only one left. To be surrounded by beings who can't possibly understand what you've lost." The pressure in her mind increased, and Maya felt tears rolling down her cheeks as the creature's own memories merged with hers, the beauty of dancing through dark matter clouds with its pod, the horror of the hunter's nets, the soul-crushing solitude of captivity. She took another step, and another, until she stood within arm's reach of the living shadow. The creature's eyes fixed on her, swirling with colors that existed beyond human perception. "I can't bring them back," Maya whispered, reaching out her hand. "But I can promise you won't have to be alone anymore." The Nixtharian moved, faster than human eyes could track. Maya felt its touch, like ice and electricity and stardust, wrap around her outstretched hand. But instead of the shredding pain she'd been warned about, she felt something else, recognition. Above, in the observation deck, Dr. Tal's dimensional form pulsed with astonishment as their instruments recorded something unprecedented, the Nixtharian's fragmenting consciousness beginning to stabilize, reaching out to form a bond with the seemingly fragile human who had dared to understand its pain. Maya Chen smiled through her tears, feeling the first threads of trust forming between two beings who had both learned the hard way that sometimes, survival itself was an act of defiance. The last of its kind had found someone who understood what that meant. Trust falls. The news of Maya's successful first contact with the Nixtharian spread through the Galactic Conservation Center like a quantum ripple. Within days, the observation deck that had once been empty now hosted a rotating audience of xenobiologists, consciousness researchers, and skeptical safety officers. Maya ignored them all, focusing instead on the delicate dance of building trust with a creature that could exist in multiple states of matter simultaneously. "Your neural patterns are highly irregular," Dr. Tal observed one morning, their constellation-like form shimmering with concern. "The sustained telepathic contact is altering your brain chemistry." Maya adjusted the environmental controls in the enclosure, carefully manipulating the dark matter density to match the creature's preferred conditions. The Nixtharian, whom she'd started calling Shadow, much to the horror of the taxonomists, undulated in the corner, its crystalline spines creating haunting harmonies. "That's rather the point," Maya replied, checking her neural implants readings. "Their species communicated through emotional resonance. How can I understand shadow if I don't let it understand me?" The creature could shred your consciousness without effort. Tal's seventh-dimensional appendage flickered with agitation. "Your species' tendency toward self-destructive empathy is exactly why we're making progress." Maya turned to face the physicist, her neural implant glowing brighter as Shadow's presence brushed against her mind. "Look at the readings. Shadow's psychic deterioration has stabilized. The crystalline growth patterns are normalizing." "Containment breach in Sector 7, the facility's AI announced. Arcturian spine wolves have escaped their enclosure. All personnel, engage emergency protocols." Maya's neural implant flashed with evacuation instructions, but she remained still, feeling Shadow's agitation grow. The creature had seen spine wolves before, they were among the hunter's favorite prey. Through their connection, Maya glimpsed fractured memories, the metallic taste of fear, the sound of crystalline bodies shattering. "Handler Chen, you must evacuate," Tal insisted, their form stretching across multiple dimensions in alarm. "No," Maya said, moving closer to Shadow. "This is an opportunity." Through their link, she projected calm, showing Shadow memories of Earth's wolves, their pack dynamics, their capacity for both ferocity and gentleness. The Nixtharian's form rippled, crystalline spines chiming in a questioning tone. "Trust goes both ways," Maya said softly, reaching out to touch one of Shadow's spines. The crystal was warm under her fingers, vibrating with frequencies that made her teeth ache. "Want to help me show them what you can really do?" The creature's star-like eyes fixed on her, and Maya felt its consciousness mesh more deeply with hers. Images flowed between them, hunting patterns, spatial awareness that transcended normal dimensions, the joy of moving through space as living shadow. Maya smiled. "Exactly." She turned to Tal, who had been recording the entire exchange with growing fascination. "Open the enclosure. Shadow and I are going to help with the spine wolves." "That is absolutely against all safety protocols." So was everything else that worked so far. Maya's neural implant pulsed in sync with Shadow's crystalline harmonies. "Sometimes the best way to prove you're not a monster is to protect others." Tal's form wavered between dimensions before finally stabilizing. "Director HFY will terminate my research grant for this." The enclosure doors slid open with a hiss of quantum-stabilized air. Maya felt shadow flow around her, its substance both solid and ethereal, protective and fierce. Together, they moved through the facility's corridors, following the sound of chaos. They found the spine wolves in the main atrium, their crystalline bodies refracting light as they terrorized a group of trapped researchers. The wolves were beautiful in their alienness, each the size of a small car, their bodies made of living crystal that could shift between solid and energy states at will. Shadow's consciousness pressed against Maya's, sharing knowledge of the wolves' weak points. Through their connection, she understood how to move, where to guide Shadow's attacks. The Nixtharian flowed like living night, hurting the wolves with precise bursts of dark energy that spoke their language of dominance and submission. Maya felt Shadow's joy at the movement, the thrill of using its abilities to protect rather than destroy. The spine wolves, recognizing a superior predator, began to back down. Their crystalline forms dimmed, shifting from aggressive angles to submissive curves. Through the facility's windows, Maya could see the gathered crowd watching in amazement as the notorious Nixtharian, the destroyer of worlds, gently shepherded the spine wolves back to their enclosure. Shadow's spines chimed with something that felt like pride, not in its power, but in its restraint. Later, in Director HFY's office, Maya stood her ground as the administrator's crystal sphere pulsed with a rainbow of emotions. "You violated 17 safety protocols," HFY began. "And prevented any casualties or property damage," Maya countered. "More importantly, we proved something vital about the Nixtharians. They weren't just predators, they were guardians. Their aggression came from a place of protection, not destruction. The director's form shifted thoughtfully. The xenobiologists are already demanding access to your neural recordings. Your methods are unprecedented. Sometimes unprecedented is exactly what we need. Maya felt Shadow's presence in her mind, a comforting darkness that had become as familiar as her own thoughts. The universe is full of creatures we call monsters simply because we never tried to understand them. And what happens when understanding comes with a price? HFY's voice harmonics carried genuine concern. The changes to your neural patterns are permanent, Handler Chen. Maya smiled, thinking of the pod Shadow had lost, the family she'd mourned on Mars. Some prices are worth paying to prove that connection is possible, even across the gaps between stars. In its enclosure, Shadow's crystalline spines chimed a harmony that resonated through the facility's quantum core, a sound that carried both acknowledgement and hope. The last of its kind had found not just a handler, but a partner in proving that sometimes, the most significant breakthroughs came from daring to trust the impossible. Breaking point. The quantum core of the Galactic Conservation Center failed without warning. One moment, the facility hummed with its usual crystalline resonance. The next, darkness swept through its corridors like a living thing. Maya was in Shadow's enclosure when it happened, working on exercises to help the Nextherian control its matter-shifting abilities. Through their neural link, she felt Shadow's immediate tension. The creature's crystalline spines flared with colors that existed beyond normal space, casting impossible shadows on walls that were quickly losing their molecular cohesion. Emergency power activated, the facility's AI announced, its voice distorting as quantum particles destabilized. Warning, containment fields failing. Core breach imminent. Evacuation protocols initiated. Maya's neural implant flared with emergency data. Without the quantum core, the station's artificial gravity would fail. Worse, the carefully maintained environments for thousands of endangered species would collapse. She felt Shadow's growing anxiety, not for itself, but for the other creatures it had come to recognize as fellow survivors. Handler Chen. Dr. Tall's voice rippled through the emergency comm system. The core's quantum matrix is cascading. We can't stabilize it remotely. Maya watched as crystalline frost began creeping across the enclosure's walls. Without proper containment, the facility's diverse atmospheric requirements were bleeding together, creating chaos on a molecular level. Through Shadow's enhanced senses, she could feel the panic of creatures in nearby habitats, the spine wolves' crystalline howls, the psychic screams of gaseous entities, the desperate movements of beings that existed in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. The maintenance bots can't reach the core, Tall continued, their usual dimensional stability fracturing with stress. The quantum fluctuations are too severe. Maya looked at Shadow, whose star-like eyes held an understanding that transcended species. But we can. Handler Chen, the core chamber is flooded with raw quantum energy. Even if you could reach it. Shadow exists partially in quantum space, Maya interrupted, her neural implant pulsing in sync with the Nextherian's crystalline harmonies. And thanks to our link, so do I now. She felt Tall's reluctance even through the failing comm system. The chance of survival isn't as important as trying. Maya reached out, letting her hand pass through Shadow's form. The creature's substance wrapped around her like living starlight, cold and warm at the same time. Send me the core schematics. Data flooded her neural implant as Shadow's consciousness merged more deeply with hers. Together, they moved through the failing facility, passing through walls that were becoming more theoretical than physical. Maya felt her body shifting between states, held together by Shadow's control over quantum reality. The core chamber was a nightmare of uncontrolled energy. Raw quantum potential lashed out in waves that could unwrite existence itself. But through Shadow's senses, Maya saw the patterns in chaos, the mathematics of reality breaking down and reforming. The containment field generators, she muttered, her voice distorting as Shadow's form rippled around her. They're out of sync. Through their shared consciousness, Shadow understood. The Nyxtherian's crystalline spines extended, each one resonating at a different quantum frequency. Maya felt their joined minds reaching out, touching the wild energy that threatened to tear the station apart. It was like trying to conduct an orchestra playing in a dozen different dimensions simultaneously. Shadow's natural ability to exist in multiple states gave them an advantage, but the strain was immense. Maya's neural implant burned as it tried to process information that human brains were never meant to handle. Together, they began to harmonize the quantum frequencies, using Shadow's crystalline spines as tuning forks for reality itself. Maya's consciousness stretched across dimensions she couldn't name, guided by Shadow's instinctive understanding of the space between spaces. In the observation deck above, instruments recorded something unprecedented, a human consciousness, supported by an Nyxtherian's natural abilities, conducting quantum energy like a symphony of creation. The core's wild fluctuations began to stabilize, reality firming up around them like cooling glass. Maya felt blood trickling from her nose, her body struggling to contain the awareness Shadow was sharing with her. But she couldn't stop, not when she could feel the relief of thousands of creatures as their environment stabilized, not when she could sense the station's quantum matrix reknitting itself under their guidance. The final harmonic locked into place with a sound that existed in no frequency humans could hear. Maya felt her knees buckle as Shadow's form surged around her, supporting her as emergency power restored itself throughout the facility. Core stabilized, the AI announced, its voice normal once again. Quantum matrix restored. Containment fields at optimal levels. Maya laughed weakly, leaning against Shadow's solid yet not solid form. The creature's star-like eyes studied her with concern, its consciousness still intimately twined with hers. "I'm okay," she assured it, even as her neural implant flashed medical warnings. "We did it." The door to the core chamber slid open, admitting a frantically dimensional shifting Tal and a team of medical personnel. Maya felt Shadow's protective surge, but sent reassurance through their link. These were friends, here to help. Handler Chen, Tal's voice created patterns in multiple dimensions. "The readings, what you just did, it should have been impossible." Maya smiled, feeling Shadow's quiet pride through their connection. Maybe impossible just means no one tried hard enough to understand yet. As the medical team approached cautiously, Maya felt Shadow's consciousness brush against hers one more time, sharing a truth that transcended language. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs came not from conquering the impossible, but from learning to dance with it. In the restored quantum light of the facility, human and Nyxtherian stood together, living proof that understanding could bridge even the gaps between realities themselves. The bond. The medical bay of the Galactic Conservation Center was designed to accommodate beings from every known corner of the universe. Yet even its advanced systems struggled to make sense of Maya Chen's new neural patterns. Her consciousness, forever altered by prolonged contact with the Nyxtherian, now resonated at frequencies that existed somewhere between conventional spacetime and quantum reality. "Fascinating," murmured Dr. Alara, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline medical suite. Her voice manifested as patterns of light that danced across Maya's neural readings. "Your brain has developed quantum pathways previously observed only in deep space-dwelling species." Maya lay on the diagnostic bed, aware of Shadow's presence despite the medical bay's containment fields. The Nyxtherian had refused to return to its enclosure after the core incident, maintaining a constant vigil outside the medical bay. Through their link, she could feel its concern, its protective instincts wrestling with the knowledge that these procedures were necessary. Will the changes affect her long-term survival? Director ZYXVA asked, their crystalline form hovering nearby. Quite the opposite, Dr. Ilara's light patterns shifted to show comparative scans. Her neural architecture is evolving to better handle the quantum awareness the Nyxtherian shares with her. It's as if her brain is developing natural shielding against the very forces that should be destroying it. Maya sat up, ignoring the protest of muscles that had been subjected to dimensional stress they were never meant to endure. "Because Shadow isn't trying to destroy me. We're adapting to each other. Through the medical bay's transparent walls, she could see the gathered crowd of researchers, xenobiologists, and handlers from across the galaxy. News of what had happened in the core chamber had spread faster than light itself, drawing attention from beings who had previously dismissed human handling methods as primitive. What you and the Nixtherian accomplished was unprecedented. Director HFY's harmonics carried notes of both concern and wonder. The quantum core synchronization required awareness across multiple dimensional planes. No single species should have been capable of it. That's just it. Maya swung her legs off the bed, feeling Shadow's presence strengthen as she moved closer to the containment field. We're not single species anymore. Not really. The medical bay's instruments chimed as her neural patterns shifted, resonating with frequencies that echoed the Nixtherian's crystalline harmonies. Through their connection, she felt Shadow's agreement, a sense of completion that went beyond physical presence. The implications for interspecies relations are staggering. Dr. Alara's light patterns swirled excitedly. If humans can adapt to share consciousness with beings that exist partially in quantum space. It's more than sharing consciousness, Maya interrupted, pressing her hand against the containment field. Outside, Shadow's crystalline spines chimed in response. It's about understanding that connection itself transcends physical laws. The Nixtherians weren't just predators or guardians, they were living bridges between realities. The containment field rippled as Shadow's form pressed against it from the other side. Through their link, Maya felt the creature's memories of its lost pod, how they had once danced through dark matter seas, their combined consciousness creating harmonies that kept the very fabric of spacetime stable in their region of space. Their extinction didn't just mean the loss of a species, Maya continued, her neural implant glowing brighter as Shadow's emotions flowed through her. It meant the loss of understanding itself. They could see the connections between all things, could feel the rhythms that hold reality together. Director HFY's crystalline form pulsed with realization. The quantum core, you didn't just stabilize it. You restored its natural harmony. Because Shadow showed me how to see it. Maya smiled as the Nixtherian's star-like eyes met hers through the field. Everything in the universe resonates at its own frequency. The trick isn't controlling those frequencies, it's learning to hear how they're already working together. Dr. Alara's light patterns formed complex equations in the air. The potential applications for space travel, for maintaining stability in quantum-sensitive environments, are secondary, Maya finished firmly. What matters is that we've proven something fundamental about life itself. No species is truly unknowable. No gap is truly unbridgeable. We just have to be willing to change ourselves in the process of understanding. Through their bond, she felt Shadow's fierce pride, not just in their achievements, but in how their connection had grown from necessity into something deeper. The last of its kind had found not just companionship, but a way to share the wisdom of its species with the wider universe. Director HFY studied them both, their crystalline form refracting the medical bay's lights in thoughtful patterns. The Conservation Center's mission has always been to preserve endangered species. Perhaps we never considered that preservation might mean more than simply keeping bodies alive. Maya nodded, feeling Shadow's consciousness wrap around hers like a comfortable embrace. Sometimes survival means evolution. Not just of bodies, but of understanding itself. The containment field dissolved under Director HFY's command. Shadow flowed into the medical bay, its form settling around Maya like living starlight. The gathered crowd watched in amazement as human and Nixtherian existed in perfect harmony, their combined presence creating frequencies that made the very air sing with possibility. In that moment, as beings from across the galaxy witnessed what trust and understanding could achieve, Maya felt Shadow share a truth that transcended all barriers. Sometimes the greatest evolution came not from fighting against the impossible, but from becoming something new together. New horizons. 6 months after the quantum core incident, the Galactic Conservation Center had transformed from a preserve for endangered species into something unprecedented in the history of spacefaring civilizations. Maya stood in the newly constructed quantum harmony chamber, watching as Shadow demonstrated dimensional resonance techniques to a group of carefully selected handlers from across the galaxy. The Nyxtherian's crystalline spines created complex harmonies as it shifted between states of matter, teaching others to sense the subtle frequencies that connected all living things. Through their permanent bond, Maya felt Shadow's satisfaction as understanding dawned in the minds of their students. The neural adaptation rate is remarkable, Dr. Tall observed, their dimensional form more stable now that they had begun learning Shadow's techniques. Even species we thought were dimensionally locked are showing signs of quantum awareness. Maya smiled, remembering their own early struggles. It was never about forcing the connection. Shadow taught me that. It's about recognizing the connections that were always there. The Conservation Center's main atrium had been redesigned to accommodate their revolutionary training program. Where once there were rigid containment fields and separation barriers, now there were graduated quantum spaces where different species could safely interact and learn from each other. The spine wolves, once considered too dangerous for direct contact, now helped teach newcomers about crystalline resonance. Director HFY materialized beside them, their crystalline form humming with frequencies they had learned from Shadow. The Galactic Council has reviewed our latest findings. They're calling it the Chin Shadow Protocol, a new foundation for interspecies conservation and communication. Through their link, Maya felt Shadow's amusement at the formal name. The Nyxtherian had a more elegant term for what they did, a concept that existed in quantum harmonies rather than words, describing the moment when different forms of consciousness learn to dance together. Representatives from 17 systems are requesting to establish similar programs, HFY continued. Your methods have revolutionized how we approach not just conservation, but first contact protocols. Maya watched as Shadow demonstrated how to perceive quantum threads that connected all living things. The Nyxtherian's form rippled with dark energy, making visible the delicate web of relationships that bound the universe together. Their students, beings of gas and crystal, energy and matter, consciousness and form, reached out with newfound awareness to touch these connections. It's not just about saving endangered species anymore, Maya said, her neural implant pulsing in harmony with Shadow's frequencies. It's about understanding that diversity itself is what keeps reality stable. Every species brings its own resonance to the universal symphony. In the far corner of the chamber, a young Arcturian handler was working with a gaseous entity from the galactic core, their disparate forms finding common ground in the quantum space between dimensions. Maya felt Shadow's pride, not just in their students' progress, but in how quickly the galaxy was learning to see what the Nyxtherians had always known. We've received the first signals from the dark matter seas, Dr. Tall announced, their forms shimmering with excitement. Other Nyxtherians, drawn by the harmonies we're creating. They're not extinct after all, just existing in frequencies we couldn't perceive before. Maya felt Shadow's surge of joy at the news, their shared consciousness reaching out to touch the distant signals. The last of its kind was no longer alone, and more importantly, its wisdom would not be lost to the universe. The Galactic Council wants to nominate you both for the Unity Prize, Director HFY said, their harmonics carrying notes of pride. No human has ever been considered before. Maya laughed, the sound creating ripples in quantum space that Shadow's spines echoed in crystalline tones. They still don't quite get it, do they? This was never about human achievement or Nyxtherian preservation. It's about proving that the boundaries between species are just another illusion we created because we couldn't see the connections. Through their bond, Shadow shared images of the future they both sensed coming, a galaxy where understanding flowed as freely as light between stars, where consciousness could bridge any gap, where the very concept of alien would evolve into something more profound, the recognition of different notes in the same cosmic song. The Conservation Center hummed with possibilities as beings from across space learned to see through each other's eyes, to feel through each other's senses, to understand through each other's minds. Maya and Shadow moved among them, living proof that evolution didn't end with physical forms, that consciousness itself could transcend the barriers of species and space. In the quantum harmonies that filled the chamber, a truth resonated that needed no translation: the greatest frontiers weren't the spaces between stars, but the connections waiting to be discovered between all living things. Every species had something to teach, something to learn, something to contribute to the symphony of existence. And in that endless song of discovery, a human handler and a creature of living shadow had shown the way forward, not through conquest or preservation alone, but through the willing transformation that came from truly understanding another's dance through the cosmos.